The sound of Thomas's leather briefcase hitting the marble entryway echoed through my 12,000 square foot estate like a judge's gavel. I didn't look up from the orchids I was arranging in the solarium, though every muscle in my body tensed at what I knew was coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Claire! His voice carried that particular edge I'd come to recognize over our 6 years of marriage. The edge that said he'd had a bad day at work and needed someone to absorb his frustration. Claire, where the hell are you? In the solarium, I called back softly, adjusting a white phalaenopsis stem with steady hands. Hands that had signed billion-dollar acquisition deals while Thomas thought I was attending book club meetings. His footsteps, expensive Italian loafers on imported travertine, both paid for from accounts he didn't know existed, approached with the determined rhythm of a man preparing for confrontation. I kept my eyes on the flowers, playing the role I'd perfected over the years. The devoted wife. The woman content to live in her successful husband's shadow. We need to talk. Thomas entered the solarium, and I could smell the scotch on his breath. 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. He loosened his tie. Hermes, a birthday gift I'd purchased through a third-party account, and dropped into one of the wicker chairs without invitation. About your situation, my situation. I nearly smiled. Instead, I set down my pruning shears and turned to face him, arranging my features into an expression of attentive concern. What's wrong, honey? Thomas ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, a gesture he used when he wanted to appear thoughtful and burdened. I had lunch with the partners today. Gary brought his wife. You remember Elizabeth? She just made partner at Morrison & Associates. And David's wife, Caroline, she's launching her third startup. I knew exactly who they were. Elizabeth Morrison Kane had once consulted for one of my subsidiary companies, though she'd never known she was working for me. Caroline's startups were impressive but modest compared to the empire I'd built. But I simply nodded, playing the interested but uninformed housewife. That's wonderful for them, I said carefully. Is it? Thomas leaned forward, his blue eyes, the same eyes that had seemed so kind when we first met, now cold and calculating. Because sitting there, listening to them talk about their wives' accomplishments, their contributions, I had to sit there and smile while having nothing to say about you. The words landed like physical blows, though I'd trained myself not to flinch. I contribute to our home, to our life. You arrange flowers, Claire. He gestured dismissively at the orchids. You plan dinner parties, you shop. You exist in this beautiful bubble I've created for you, and you contribute nothing of actual value. The irony was so rich I had to bite the inside of my cheek. This beautiful bubble, this estate with its 10 bedrooms, indoor pool, wine cellar stocked with vintages older than our marriage, the art collection featuring 2 original Monets and a Picasso sketch. All of it purchased through a web of LLCs and trusts that led back to me, to the company I'd built from nothing 15 years ago. Thornton Enterprises. My firstborn, my true love, my greatest achievement, a multinational conglomerate specializing in sustainable technology and green energy solutions. We'd just broken into the Fortune 500 last quarter. And Thomas had no idea his wife's name was on every patent, every acquisition, every major decision that shaped the company's direction. I keep our home, I said quietly, maintaining the facade. I support your career? Support? He laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the glass walls. Claire, let's be honest. You're decorative. You're a trophy wife without even being a trophy. You've never accomplished anything worth displaying. I turned back to the orchids, using the movement to hide the flash of anger that threatened to break through my carefully constructed mask. My fingers found a wilting leaf, plucking it with more force than necessary. That's cruel, Thomas. It's honest. He stood pacing now, working himself into a state I recognized. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. He'd been planning this conversation, rehearsing it. I'm 48 years old. I'm a senior executive at one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the country. I pull down $400,000 a year, $385,000 actually. I'd seen his last bonus statement when it arrived at the house. Good money, certainly. Not even a fraction of what my companies generated quarterly, but respectable. What he didn't know was that his firm's 3 largest clients were all subsidiaries of Thornton Enterprises, fed to them through my COO, Marcus Chen, who'd been with me since the beginning. And I deserve a partner who matches my ambition, Thomas continued. Someone who understands the world I operate in. Not a woman who spends her days playing house. Playing house! I repeated the words slowly, testing them. In the house you chose, that you wanted, that I pay for, he corrected sharply. Every square foot, every piece of furniture, every designer dress in your closet. All of it comes from my salary, Claire, my work, my success. The house had cost $18 million when I purchased it 7 years ago, 2 months before I met Thomas at that charity gala. The charity, a foundation supporting women in STEM fields, was one I'd founded anonymously. Thomas had been there as a +1, brought by a colleague who was actually attending to network with potential donors. Donors like me, though I'd been listed in the program only as Anonymous Benefactor Platinum level. I'd worn a simple dress that night, nothing that screamed wealth. I'd introduced myself as Claire Winters, leaving off the Thornton that legally followed. When Thomas asked what I did, I'd smiled and said I did a bit of consulting work, nothing too exciting. The lie had come easily. I'd learned by then that men like Thomas, handsome, successful, confident, couldn't handle the truth of a woman who out-earned them by factors of 100. I understand this is difficult for you, I said, turning to face him again. Keep calm, stay in character. Let him think he's in control. What would you like me to do? Thomas stopped pacing. He'd been expecting a fight, I realized. Tears, maybe. Anger. My calm acceptance seemed to throw him briefly off balance, but he recovered quickly, his jaw setting in that determined way that probably served him well in boardroom negotiations. I want you to get a job, he said flatly. A real job. Not volunteer work or some part-time boutique position. Something with a salary, benefits, responsibilities. Something that proves you're capable of existing in the adult world. A job, I echoed. Yes. And not some minimum wage coffee shop position either. I want you to leverage whatever education you have. You did finish college, didn't you? I had 3 degrees, actually. A bachelor's in computer science from MIT, a master's in business administration from Stanford, and a doctorate in sustainable engineering from Cambridge. But Thomas had never asked about my education, and I'd never volunteered the information. He'd simply assumed that the woman he married was decorative and pliable, content to exist in his shadow. I have a degree, I confirmed, not elaborating. Then use it. Find something appropriate. Gary's wife started at $75,000. I think that's a reasonable goal for you. It won't match my income, obviously, but at least you'll be contributing something to our household. Our household. The phrase made my skin crawl. Everything he thought of as his, the cars in the garage, the furniture he believed he'd purchased, even the monthly mortgage payment he made to what he assumed was a bank, but was actually an account I'd set up to maintain the illusion. All of it was mine. Built with my innovation, my risk-taking, my sleepless nights turning algorithms into applications that changed entire industries. How long do I have? I asked, keeping my voice level. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 months. Thomas checked his watch. A Patek Philippe I'd had delivered to the house wrapped as a bonus gift from his fictional grateful firm. If you can't find something suitable by then, we need to seriously reconsider this marriage. I can't continue living with a woman who earns nothing while I carry the entire financial burden. The entire financial burden. The irony was so profound I almost laughed. But instead I simply nodded, the dutiful wife accepting her husband's ultimatum. I'll start looking tomorrow, I promised. Good. He seemed satisfied now, his point made. I'm going to change and hit the gym. The Hendersons are coming for dinner Friday. I assume you can manage that without embarrassing me. The Hendersons. Richard Henderson was the CEO of a mid-sized renewable energy company that had been courting acquisition offers. His company had potential but needed capital and infrastructure. Thornton Enterprises had been circling for 6 months, and now they were coming to dinner at my house, invited by my husband who had no idea he was facilitating a business negotiation. "Of course," I said. "I'll make sure everything is perfect." Thomas left without another word, his footsteps receding toward our bedroom suite. Our bedroom, where he slept in sheets with a thread count he'd never bothered to learn, under a ceiling with crown molding he'd never questioned, in a bed that cost more than most people's cars. Alone in the solarium, surrounded by orchids that cost $500 per plant, a detail Thomas had also never questioned, I pulled out my phone. Not the iPhone he knew about, the one I used for calling friends and ordering groceries. The other one, the encrypted satellite phone that connected me to my real life. I had 3 messages waiting. The first was from Marcus. Board meeting moved to Thursday. Henderson acquisition looking positive. Need your final approval on the terms. The second was from my attorney, Patricia Vance. Postnuptial agreement drafted per your specifications. Everything is ironclad. Just need your word to proceed. The third was from my head of security, a former FBI agent named James Rourke. Finished the deep dive on Thomas Morrison. You're not going to like what we found. Call me. I stood there for a long moment, phone in hand, orchids perfuming the air with their delicate sweetness. 6 years. For 6 years I'd maintained this charade, playing the role of the ineffectual wife to a man who grew more contemptuous with each passing month. At first, I'd told myself it was a sociological experiment. Could a marriage work if one party had no idea who their spouse really was? But as time went on, I'd recognized it for what it truly was, a test. A test Thomas was currently failing spectacularly. I dialed Marcus first. He picked up on the first ring, his voice warm and familiar. We'd been friends since graduate school. 2 ambitious kids who'd bonded over late-night coding sessions and dreams of changing the world. "Tell me you're finally done with this nonsense," he said without preamble. "He just gave me an ultimatum," I replied, watching a hummingbird hover near the glass. 3 months to find a job earning at least $75,000, or he's reconsidering the marriage. Marcus's laugh was sharp and bitter. $75,000. You made that in interest while we've been talking. What are you going to do? Give him exactly what he wants. I smiled, an expression that would have alarmed Thomas if he could see it. Schedule a meeting with Patricia for tomorrow morning. And tell Henderson I'll be attending Friday's dinner after all. It's time he met the real owner of the company that's about to acquire his. You're going to reveal everything? Not yet. I touched one of the orchid blooms, its petals soft as silk. But I think it's time to start arranging the pieces. Thomas wants me to get a job? I'll get a job. Just not the one he's expecting. We discussed logistics for the next 20 minutes. The board meeting on Thursday would now include a new agenda item, my public emergence as CEO. For 15 years, I'd operated through proxies and encrypted communications, building an empire while remaining anonymous. It had been necessary in the early days when I was young and female in a male-dominated industry. Staying hidden had become habit, then strategy, then a kind of game. But games had to end eventually. After hanging up with Marcus, I called Patricia. She'd been my attorney since the beginning, one of the few people who knew the full scope of my holdings. She was also the one who'd drawn up my prenuptial agreement with Thomas, an agreement that looked standard on the surface but had clauses buried deep within its legal language that would make a divorce very interesting for him. I was wondering, when you'd call, Patricia said. Her voice was crisp, professional, betraying none of the satisfaction I knew she felt. She'd never liked Thomas, had told me from the beginning that he was a narcissist who'd drain me dry if I let him. Ready to stop playing dress-up? He doesn't know it yet, I replied, but he's about to get the education of his lifetime. Tell me about the post-nuptial agreement. It's beautiful, if I do say so myself. I could hear papers shuffling. Under California law, we can establish that all property acquired before and during the marriage belongs to you alone, which it does, through your corporate structure. But here's the clever part. We've documented every expense Thomas thought he was paying, but was actually coming from your accounts. The mortgage payments to that fake bank account you set up. The car payments. The credit cards. All of it. And according to the agreement, if Thomas wants to dissolve the marriage, he'll be required to repay every cent of what he believes he invested in your shared life, which amounts to roughly $4.2 million over 6 years. I whistled softly. He doesn't have $4.2 million. Exactly. His savings account has maybe $40,000. His 401k has another $300,000. He's been living well beyond his actual means because you've been subsidizing his lifestyle without him knowing it. Patricia paused. Claire, I have to ask, why did you do this? Why let it go on so long? It was a fair question. One I'd asked myself countless times. Usually at 3 a.m. when Thomas was snoring beside me and I was reviewing acquisition proposals on my tablet. The screen dimmed so as not to wake him. Because I wanted to know. I said finally. I wanted to know if it was possible to have a real marriage, a real partnership, with someone who didn't see me as a bank account or a networking opportunity. Every relationship I'd had before Thomas ended the same way. Once men found out about my money, I stopped being a person and became a resource. And Thomas? Thomas proved that hiding my success didn't solve the problem. He married someone he thought was beneath him, and he spent 6 years making sure I knew it. The cruelty is different, but it's still cruelty. So what's the plan? I told her. As I spoke, outlining the steps I'd been mentally arranging for months, I felt something loosen in my chest. Relief, maybe. Or perhaps just the satisfaction of finally taking action after years of passive observation. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed, a sound of pure delight. You know what? He's going to deserve every second of this. I'll have everything ready by Thursday. The final call was to James Rourke. His news was less pleasant. Your husband's been having an affair, he said bluntly. James didn't believe in softening blows. Her name is Vanessa Carlisle. 29. Works in his firm's marketing department. It's been going on for about 8 months. I sat down on one of the wicker chairs, the same chair Thomas had occupied an hour earlier when he'd delivered his ultimatum. 8 months. All those late nights at the office, those weekend golf tournaments, those business trips to cities I could have told him had no active clients, all of it had been a lie. Does he think he's in love with her? I asked, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. Based on the surveillance? Yes, he's been apartment hunting. Downtown trendy area. Place goes for about $4,000 a month, which he can't actually afford on his salary, but he doesn't seem to realize that yet. James paused. There's more. He's been talking to a divorce attorney, planning to file within the next 6 months. Before or after his 3-month ultimatum to me? Before if Vanessa has her way. She's pushing him to leave sooner. Apparently, she's tired of being the secret girlfriend. I closed my eyes, processing this information. 6 years of marriage, and Thomas had already moved on, was already planning his exit. The ultimatum about my employment wasn't about wanting me to contribute. It was about establishing grounds for divorce. He was building a narrative. The unsuccessful wife who couldn't meet his standards, who forced him to carry her financially, who ultimately drove him away through her inadequacy. Send me everything, I said. Photos, timeline, financial records of his spending on her. All of it, already in your secure email. Claire, are you okay? Was I? The strangest part was realizing I felt more relieved than hurt. Thomas's affair removed any lingering guilt I might have felt about the elaborate deception I'd been maintaining. It confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect. Our marriage had been a failure from the start. 2 people playing roles that had nothing to do with who they actually were. I'm fine, I said, and meant it. Better than fine, actually. This simplifies things. After the calls, I sat in the solarium as the afternoon light shifted to evening gold, thinking about the next steps. Thomas wanted me to get a job. Fine. Tomorrow I would dust off my real resume and start making calls. But not to potential employers, to headhunters and executive placement firms. I would apply for positions at Thornton Enterprises. The thought made me smile. I would go through the entire interview process at my own company, working through the levels of HR and management that I'd personally established. I'd sit across from executives I'd hired and answer their questions about my qualifications. And then, when the time was right, I'd accept a position at an appropriate salary, perhaps starting at exactly $75,000, just to satisfy Thomas's requirements. He'd be so proud of his little wife for finally finding employment. He'd probably tell all his friends about how he'd motivated me to finally make something of myself. And he'd have no idea that every paycheck I deposited into our joint account was coming from a company I owned, paid with money I'd earned, for a job that was essentially me paying myself to maintain the charade just a little longer. The sound of Thomas descending the stairs pulled me from my thoughts. He'd changed into workout clothes, Nike, top of the line, purchased with money he thought was his. "I'm heading to the gym," he called. "Don't wait up. I'll probably grab dinner out with Vanessa," I thought. "At that Italian place in the Marina District he thinks I don't know about, where he pays with the credit card I actually finance." "Have a good workout," I called back, my voice perfectly pleasant. The front door closed. His car, a BMW M5 that cost $90,000 and was titled in his name, though I'd paid for it through another Shell account, roared to life and pulled out of the driveway. Alone in my house, I walked through the rooms I'd carefully designed and furnished. The living room with its vaulted ceilings and fireplace made of rare Italian marble. The dining room where we'd hosted countless dinner parties, Thomas playing the successful provider while I played the grateful wife. The kitchen with its professional-grade appliances that I actually knew how to use, though I often pretended ignorance to feed Thomas's ego. Every room told a story of the lie we'd been living. But that lie was about to end. I climbed the stairs to the third floor, to a room Thomas never entered because I'd told him it was my craft room. He'd accepted this explanation without question, never curious about what crafts I might be doing, never wondering why the door was always locked. I punched in the security code, a 16-digit number that changed weekly, and entered my real office. 3 walls of windows overlooked the San Francisco Bay, the city glittering in the growing darkness. The 4th wall was covered in screens, each displaying different aspects of my business empire. Stock tickers, news feeds, real-time data from manufacturing facilities in 12 countries. My desk was a custom piece of curved glass and steel, holding 3 monitors and a keyboard that controlled systems Thomas couldn't begin to comprehend. This was me. This was Claire Thornton, not Claire Morrison, the housewife. Here I didn't arrange flowers or plan dinner parties. Here, I shaped the future of renewable energy, made decisions that affected thousands of employees, negotiated with world leaders and corporate titans. I settled into my chair and began typing, my fingers flying over the keys. There were emails to send, strategies to adjust, pieces to move into position. The Henderson acquisition needed final approval. The new solar panel technology my research team had developed needed a launch strategy. The expansion into Southeast Asian markets needed oversight. But first, I drafted an email to my head of HR, Diane Summers. Diane had been with me for 8 years, a brilliant woman who'd built one of the most respected human resources departments in the industry. She knew who I was, of course. She'd signed an NDA so comprehensive it would take a team of lawyers a week to read through it. "Diane," I typed, "I need you to help me with an unusual situation." I explained what I needed, how I'd be applying for a position at Thornton Enterprises under my married name, how I wanted to go through the entire standard interview process, how no one except her and Marcus could know my true identity until I was ready to reveal it. "Consider it an audit of our hiring practices," I wrote, "and a personal experiment in corporate anonymity. Can we pull this off?" Her reply came back within 10 minutes. "Claire, this is either brilliant or completely insane." "Possibly both. But yes, absolutely. We can do this. When do you want to start?" "Tomorrow," I wrote back. "Let's see if Thornton Enterprises is ready to hire its own CEO." I worked until midnight, long after Thomas returned home and went to bed without checking on me. In the morning, I knew He'd wake up and go through his usual routine, never questioning where I'd been or what I'd been doing. That was the pattern we'd established over 6 years, parallel lives that intersected only at meals and social functions. But the pattern was breaking. The game was changing, and Thomas, who thought he'd just given his wife an ultimatum, had no idea he'd actually started a countdown to his own reckoning. I shut down the computers and locked the office door behind me. Downstairs, I paused at our bedroom door, listening to Thomas's steady breathing. He slept the sleep of the righteous, convinced of his own superiority, dreaming perhaps of his new life with Vanessa in that apartment he couldn't afford. Let him dream. Let him plan. Let him think he was in control of this narrative. In 3 months, he'd learn the truth. In 3 months, every assumption he'd made about our marriage, our life, and most importantly about me, would shatter like glass hitting marble. I smiled in the darkness and went to sleep in one of the guest rooms, something I'd been doing more and more frequently. Thomas never noticed, never asked. He was so absorbed in his own world that I'd become invisible to him, which was exactly what I'd needed to prepare for what came next. Tomorrow, the transformation would begin. Tomorrow, Claire Morrison would start her job search. And by the end of it, Thomas would realize that the woman he'd married hadn't been beneath him at all she'd been so far, above him that he'd never even thought to look up, the femme. Morning sun filtered through the kitchen, windows as I prepared breakfast, playing my role one last time. Thomas entered wearing his favorite charcoal suit, already on his phone, barely acknowledging my presence. "Coffee's ready," I said softly, pouring him a cup. He grunted in response, scrolling through emails. "I have back-to-back meetings today. Don't forget, the Hendersons on Friday. Try to make a good impression for once." I bit back a smile. "I'll do my best. And the job search?" He finally looked up, his expression expectant. "You're starting today, right?" "Already have an interview scheduled," I replied, which was technically true. Diane had arranged for me to meet with the senior HR director at Thornton Enterprises at 10 o'clock. Thomas's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That was fast. Where?" "A technology company downtown. Sustainable energy sector." I kept my tone casual, humble. "It's probably nothing, but they agreed to see me." "Well," he straightened his tie, one I'd given him last Christmas. "Don't get your hopes up. These things take time. Just try not to embarrass yourself." He left without kissing me goodbye, as usual. Through the window, I watched his BMW disappear down our tree-lined street. Our street, my street, every lamppost, every manicured lawn, every security gate, all maintained by the homeowners association I'd personally funded. I waited exactly 5 minutes, then headed upstairs to my real closet, the locked section Thomas had never seen. Inside hung the wardrobe of Claire Thornton, tailored power suits, designer pieces chosen for boardrooms and international summits, not charity luncheons and garden parties. I selected a midnight blue Armani suit, paired it with Louboutin heels, and styled my hair in a sleek chignon instead of the soft waves Thomas preferred. The transformation took 40 minutes. When I looked in the mirror, the timid housewife was gone. In her place stood a woman worth $3.2 billion. The drive to Thornton Tower took 25 minutes. I'd deliberately designed our headquarters to be imposing, 42 stories of glass and steel in the heart of San Francisco's financial district, with our logo visible for blocks. I parked in the underground garage, in the spot marked Reserved CEO, and took my private elevator to the executive floor. Marcus was waiting in my office, grinning. "Ready for your first day as an entry-level applicant? Let's see if our hiring process is as good as we think it is." I settled behind my desk, a custom piece I'd had made from reclaimed teak. "Walk me through the schedule." First interview is with Sarah Mitchell, Senior HR Director. She knows who you are, obviously, but she's agreed to conduct a completely standard interview. Then you'll meet with department heads from 3 divisions. They don't know. After that, if you pass, we'll schedule a final interview with the executive team. Perfect. I pulled out my fabricated resume, one that listed Claire Morrison's credentials. MIT degree, some freelance consulting work, a gap for family responsibilities. All true, technically, just missing the part where I'd built a Fortune 500 company during that time. The interview with Sarah was surreal. She sat across from me in the standard conference room, asking textbook questions about my experience and goals, while we both fought to keep straight faces. "What interests you about Thornton Enterprises?" she asked, pen poised over her notepad. "The mission," I replied honestly. "Sustainable energy isn't just good business. It's necessary for our survival as a species." "I want to be part of that solution," Sarah smiled. "And you're applying for the analyst position in our sustainability assessment division?" "Yes, it seems like a good fit for my background. The salary range is $75,000 to $90,000, depending on experience." She glanced at my resume. "Given your education and the consulting work you've done, I think we could start you at $85,000. "How does that sound?" "More than fair," I said, suppressing a laugh. I made that much an interest every 6 hours. The next 3 interviews were more challenging. I met with David Chen, head of sustainability assessment, a brilliant analyst I'd recruited from Berkeley 3 years ago. He put me through a rigorous technical interview, asking detailed questions about environmental impact algorithms and carbon offset calculations. I had to carefully calibrate my answers, demonstrating competence without revealing the depth of knowledge that would raise suspicions. "You really know your stuff," David said, impressed. "Most candidates can't explain the greenhouse gas protocol this clearly." "Where did you say you've been working?" "Freelance consulting," I repeated. "Mostly remote work for smaller firms. Nothing too exciting." "Well, you're overqualified for the analyst position, honestly." He made notes on his tablet. "Have you considered a senior analyst role? The pay is better, $120,000. "Let's start with the analyst position," I said carefully. "I've been out of the office environment for a while. I'd like to ease back in." By 3 o'clock, I'd completed all my interviews. Diane met me in the executive break room, the one on the top floor that required biometric access. "They loved you," she reported. "David wants to hire you immediately. So does Rebecca from research and Martin from development. They're all sending their recommendations to HR." She paused. "Are you really going through with this?" "Every step." I poured myself coffee from the Italian machine I'd had installed last year. "I want the offer letter, the orientation, the whole experience. And I don't want anyone knowing until I'm ready." "And when will that be?" "Friday night," I smiled. "At the dinner party. When Richard Henderson is there to witness it." "You're diabolical," Diane said. But she was grinning. "I'll have your offer letter ready by tomorrow." I spent the rest of the afternoon in my real office, catching up on actual work. There were contracts to review for our expansion into Brazil, a crisis with a supplier in Germany that needed my attention, and final preparations for the Henderson acquisition. Marcus joined me for the supplier meeting via video conference, and together we smoothed over the logistics issue that had threatened to delay our production schedule. At 6 o'clock, I changed back into my housewife costume, a floral dress and cardigan, and drove home, arriving before Thomas. I prepared his favorite meal, set the table, and was arranging fresh flowers when he walked in. "How did it go?" he asked, dropping his briefcase by the door. "Really well, actually." I kept my voice modest, uncertain. "They seemed impressed with my qualifications. They said they'd let me know by tomorrow." Thomas looked surprised. "That is fast." "What's the position?" "Analyst. In their sustainability division. The salary would be $85,000. "85? He actually smiled, looking pleased with himself. "That's better than I expected." "Good for you, Claire C. You just needed the right motivation." The right motivation. As if his contempt had somehow inspired me to achieve something, rather than revealing his true character. "It's not a done deal yet," I said, "but I'm hopeful." "Well, don't celebrate too early." He loosened his tie, already pulling out his phone. "I need to answer some emails before dinner. These clients are demanding. Those clients. 2 of them were Thornton subsidiaries funneled to his firm by Marcus. They were demanding because I'd specifically instructed them to be keeping Thomas busy and distracted while I set up the next phase. The offer letter arrived Wednesday morning, delivered by courier to our house. Thomas was already at work, so I opened it alone. Reading the formal language offering Claire Morrison a position at Thornton Enterprises, starting salary $85,000, benefits package included, start date flexible. I called Thomas at the office. I got the offer, I said, letting excitement color my voice. Already? That's actually impressive. He sounded genuinely surprised. When do you start? That's flexible. I was thinking Monday after our dinner party. That gives me a few days to prepare. Sure, fine. Listen, I have to go. But Claire? I'm proud of you. This is good. This is what I wanted. After he hung up, I stared at the phone for a long moment. I'm proud of you. As if my worth was determined by his approval. As if an $85,000 salary made me valuable in his eyes when I'd been worth billions all along. Thursday was the board meeting. I arrived early before any of the board members and sat in my usual chair at the head of the table. For 15 years, I'd attended these meetings via encrypted video, my face obscured, my voice modulated. The board knew me only as C. Thornton, the mysterious founder who'd built an empire from algorithms and ambition. Today, they'd meet me in person. Marcus arrived first, followed by the board members, 8 successful executives and investors who'd been with me for years. They filed in, chatting among themselves, settling into their chairs. Then they looked up and saw me sitting at the head of the table, and the room fell silent. Good morning, I said calmly. For those who don't know me, I'm Claire Thornton. I believe we're overdue for a proper introduction. The shock on their faces was worth every uncomfortable moment of the past 6 years. Margaret Chen, our lead investor, recovered first. You're Claire Thornton? The Claire Thornton? The same, I smiled. I apologize for the secrecy, but it was necessary in the beginning, and then it became convenient. But circumstances have changed, and it's time for me to step out of the shadows. For the next hour, I walked them through the reasons for my anonymity, the structure I'd maintained, and my plans going forward. They listened, asked questions, and by the end they were all nodding in understanding. The Henderson acquisition, I said finally. I'll be closing that deal personally on Friday night at a dinner party at my home. I'd like several of you there as witnesses, though Richard Henderson won't know who you are until the right moment. This is highly unusual, said Robert Chang, our chief financial officer. But then again, everything about you has been unusual. I suppose we shouldn't expect anything different. One more thing, I added. My husband, Thomas Morrison, will also be there. He doesn't know who I am, who I really am. That will also be revealed Friday night. Margaret's eyes widened. Your husband doesn't know you own Thornton Enterprises? He doesn't know I own anything, I confirmed. He believes he's been supporting me financially for 6 years. The revelation should be educational for him. Marcus laughed. Educational? That's one word for it. Friday morning arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, mild temperature, ideal for the evening I'd planned. I spent the day preparing, not as the nervous housewife Thomas expected, but as the CEO orchestrating a carefully planned revelation. The caterers arrived at 3, staff I'd hired personally through my corporate account. They knew exactly what I wanted, an elegant dinner for 12, with specific wines, specific courses, and specific timing. Thomas thought I was handling it all myself, but the truth was I'd planned corporate events for heads of state. A dinner party was simple by comparison. At 5 o'clock, I went upstairs to dress. Not in something Thomas would choose, not the demure cocktail dress or soft pastels. Instead, I wore a floor-length emerald gown, fitted and elegant, paired with the diamond necklace I'd bought myself last year, a piece worth more than Thomas's annual salary, kept hidden in my locked closet. When I came downstairs, Thomas was already in the living room, drink in hand, and he froze when he saw me. What are you wearing? His tone was accusatory. A dress. For our dinner party. It's too much, Claire. Too formal, too flashy? The Hendersons will think you're trying too hard. I'll take that risk, I said calmly. Before he could argue further, the doorbell rang. The first guests had arrived, Margaret Chen and Robert Chang, who Thomas knew as business associates I'd supposedly met through volunteer work. They greeted me warmly, playing their parts perfectly. "Claire, you look stunning," Margaret said, kissing my cheek. "And Thomas, good to see you again." Thomas shook hands, his expression confused. These people treated me with a deference he wasn't used to seeing, and it clearly unsettled him. More guests arrived, 3 more board members, Marcus with his wife, and finally Richard and Patricia Henderson. Richard was a tall man in his early 60s, silver-haired and distinguished, exactly the type of executive Thomas admired. They shook hands, made small talk, while Patricia, a sharp-eyed woman who'd built her own successful consulting firm, assessed the room with interest. Over cocktails, Thomas held court, discussing his work at the consulting firm, name-dropping clients, positioning himself as the successful executive hosting a dinner party. I watched him perform, saw how he diminished me in small ways, interrupting when I spoke, correcting my statements, making jokes at my expense that made everyone laugh uncomfortably. "Claire's been a homemaker for years," he told Richard at one point. "But she finally landed a job this week. We're very proud." "Oh?" Richard's eyebrows lifted. "Where will you be working?" Before I could answer, Thomas jumped in. "Some tech company downtown. Analyst position. It's a start anyway." "Which company?" Richard pressed. "Thornton Enterprises," I said, meeting his eyes steadily. The reaction from those who knew was subtle but noticeable. Marcus suppressed a smile. Margaret raised her wine glass to hide her expression. But Richard looked interested. "Thornton Enterprises? That's impressive, Claire. They're very selective. What will you be doing there?" "Actually," I said, setting down my glass, "I think it's time we move this conversation to the dinner table. I have some announcements to make." Thomas looked startled, but I was already moving toward the dining room, and the guests followed. The table was set perfectly, with place cards I'd arranged myself. I'd seated Thomas at the opposite end from me, with Richard Henderson on my right and Patricia on my left. Once everyone was settled, I stood. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began. "Some of you know why you're here. Others are about to find out. Thomas, Richard, Patricia, this evening is going to include some surprises. I ask for your patience as I explain." Thomas was frowning now, sensing something was wrong but not knowing what. "Richard," I continued, turning to him, "your company, Henderson Renewable Solutions, has been in acquisition talks with Thornton Enterprises for 6 months. You've been negotiating through intermediaries, working with executives you've never met in person. You've been frustrated by the process, the secrecy, the layers of corporate structure between you and the decision-maker." Richard nodded slowly. "That's accurate. Though I'm not sure why you're bringing this up at a dinner party." "Because," I said, "I'm the decision-maker you've been trying to reach. I'm Claire Thornton, founder and CEO of Thornton Enterprises, and I'm prepared to offer you a deal tonight that will exceed your expectations." The silence that followed was profound. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. Patricia's eyes went wide. And Thomas? Thomas looked like I'd struck him. "That's not funny, Claire," he said, his voice tight. "It's not a joke." I gestured to Margaret. "Margaret Chen has been my lead investor for 12 years. Robert Chang is our CFO. Marcus Chen is my COO. We founded the company together 15 years ago. Every person at this table except you, Richard, Patricia, and Vanessa knows exactly who I am." "Vanessa?" Patricia looked confused. "Who's Vanessa?" "Thomas's girlfriend," I said calmly. "The woman he's been seeing for 8 months. The woman he's planning to leave me for." I turned to Thomas, whose face had gone white. "Did you think I didn't know? I've had security following you since January. I know about the apartment you're looking at. I know about the divorce attorney you consulted. I know everything." "This is insane," Thomas stammered, standing. "You're making this up, am I?" I pulled out my phone, my real phone, and brought up a photograph. "This is you and Vanessa having lunch at Cafe Rosso last Tuesday. This is you looking at apartments on Post Street. This is the credit card statement showing charges at jewelry stores, restaurants, and hotels. All paid for with money you thought was yours but was actually mine. I set the phone down and looked around the table. For 6 years, I've maintained an elaborate deception. I let Thomas believe he was supporting me, that his salary paid for this house, these cars, our lifestyle. In reality, I've been funding everything through a complex network of trusts and corporate accounts. This house? I bought it 2 months before I met him. The mortgage payments he thinks he's been making? They go into an account I control. Every dollar he's spent, every luxury he's enjoyed, has come from my company, my work, my success. Why? Richard asked, genuinely curious. Why hide it? Because I wanted to know if it was possible to have a real relationship with someone who didn't see me as a resource to be exploited. I'd been burned before by men who wanted my money more than me. So I hid who I was, presented myself as someone ordinary, someone safe. I looked at Thomas, who was still standing, frozen. I thought maybe if a man fell in love with regular Claire instead of billionaire Claire, it would be real. But what I learned was that Thomas didn't fall in love with me at all. He fell in love with the idea of being superior to me. He needed someone beneath him to feel successful. Claire, Thomas said, his voice hoarse. This is crazy. You don't own a Fortune 500 company? I smiled. But I do. Marcus, would you mind? Marcus stood, pulling out his tablet. Thornton Enterprises, founded 15 years ago by Claire Thornton, specializing in sustainable energy technology. Current valuation, $28 billion. Annual revenue, $4.6 billion. Employees, 12,000 across 32 countries. Major innovations include the Thornton solar panel, the most efficient photovoltaic technology on the market, and the T-battery, which has revolutionized energy storage. The company went public 8 years ago, but Claire retained controlling interest, 68% of shares. As for this house, Margaret added, it's worth $22 million now. Purchased by Claire 7 years ago through the Meridian Trust. The car's in your garage, Thomas? Titled in your name but paid for through shell accounts Claire controls. Your credit cards, your country club membership, even the gym where you work out, all paid for by Claire's money. Thomas sat down heavily, his face ashen. This isn't possible. You're a housewife. You arrange flowers. You plan dinner parties. I do those things, I agreed. But I also run a multinational corporation, hold 43 patents, and sit on the boards of 6 other companies. The volunteer work I did? Board meetings. The book clubs? Executive strategy sessions. Every moment you thought I was doing nothing, I was building an empire you couldn't begin to comprehend. I turned back to Richard. So here's my offer. I'll acquire Henderson Renewable Solutions for $800 million, $200 million above your asking price. You'll stay on as president of the division, with full autonomy and a seat on our board. Your employees keep their jobs. Your technology gets the infrastructure it needs, and together we'll dominate the renewable energy market for the next decade. Richard was staring at me. Then at the papers Marcus was sliding across the table. This is everything I wanted. I know. I read your proposal months ago and knew we'd be a perfect fit. I've just been waiting for the right moment. I looked at Thomas again. The right moment to stop hiding, Patricia spoke up, her voice careful. And what happens now? With your marriage? That depends on Thomas. I sat back down, folding my hands on the table. He gave me an ultimatum 3 months ago. Get a job or he'd reconsider our marriage. Well, I got a job. At my own company. Starting Monday, I'll be working as an analyst in the sustainability division, earning $85,000 a year, exactly what he said would be acceptable. I'll deposit those paychecks into our joint account, and technically, I'll be meeting his requirements. But, I continued, I've also had my attorney draw up some documents. Thomas, if you want a divorce, you're entitled to one. California is a community property state, which means you're entitled to half of everything acquired during our marriage. Unfortunately for you, I acquired nothing during our marriage. I already owned everything before we met. The prenuptial agreement you signed, the one you didn't bother reading carefully because you assumed you were the wealthy one, specifies this very clearly. Thomas found his voice. The prenup said we kept our own assets separate. Exactly. And all the assets are mine. However, there's an interesting clause you also didn't read. If we divorce, you're required to repay any community expenses you claim to have paid, but were actually paid by the other spouse. So all those mortgage payments? I'll need those back. The car payments, the credit cards, the club memberships, all of it. Roughly $4.2 million. Patricia whistled softly. He doesn't have $4.2 million. I know, I said. Which is why I'm offering an alternative. Thomas, you can stay married to me. We'll renegotiate our relationship with complete honesty this time. You'll continue living here, continue working at your firm, which, by the way, I can make very successful or very unsuccessful depending on my mood, since I control 3 of your biggest clients. In exchange, you'll sign a postnuptial agreement acknowledging my assets, and you'll attend marriage counseling with me to see if we can build something real. Or, I continued, you can have your divorce. You can go live with Vanessa in that apartment you can't afford. I'll call in the debt you owe me, you'll declare bankruptcy, and you'll start your life over with nothing. Your choice. The room was silent. Thomas sat there, his world crumbling around him, every assumption he'd ever made about his life revealed as fiction. Finally, Richard laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. This is the most extraordinary business dinner I've ever attended. Claire, you're remarkable. I accept your offer. He extended his hand across the table. I shook it firmly. Welcome to Thornton Enterprises, Richard. Patricia, I assume you'll want to be involved in the negotiations? Absolutely. Patricia was smiling now. I think I'm going to enjoy working with you. The rest of the dinner was almost festive. We discussed the Henderson acquisition, celebrated the partnership, and ignored Thomas, who sat silent at the end of the table, barely touching his food. When the evening ended and the guests departed, each one congratulated me, welcomed me to my new position, and promised discretion about everything they'd witnessed. Richard was the last to leave. You know, he said at the door, when I came here tonight, I expected a boring dinner party with your husband's colleagues. Instead, I got front row seats to the most dramatic business negotiation of my career. Thank you for that. Thank you for understanding, I replied. I know my methods are unconventional. Unconventional, but effective. I'll have my team contact Marcus on Monday to start the paperwork. After everyone left, I found Thomas sitting in the living room, staring at nothing. So, I said, settling into the chair across from him, what's your decision? He looked at me, really looked at me, for perhaps the first time in years. Who are you? I'm Claire Thornton. I'm the woman you married, and the woman you never bothered to really know. I'm brilliant, successful, and worth more than you ever imagined. And I'm also hurt, angry, and disappointed that the man I chose to love proved to be exactly like all the others, just in a different way. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was hollow. Because I wanted you to love me for me. Not for my money, not for my connections, not for what I could do for your career. Just me. But you never did you? You loved the idea of being superior. You needed me to be less so you could be more. Thomas was quiet for a long time. The affair was the final proof that this marriage was already over. You checked out months ago, Thomas. You just didn't have the courage to tell me. What do you want from me? He asked finally. I want you to leave, I said simply. I want you to take your clothes, your personal items, and go stay wherever you've been staying with Vanessa. I'll have my attorney contact you next week with divorce papers. I won't pursue the debt. Consider it my final gift to you. But I want you out of my house, out of my life, and I never want to see you again. Claire. My name is Dr. Claire Thornton. I have 3 degrees, 43 patents, and a company that's changing the world. You have 48 hours to collect your things. After that, anything left will be donated. He stood slowly, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. I never knew you. No, I agreed. You never wanted to. That was the problem. Thomas left that night, and I never saw him again. The divorce was finalized 3 months later, quick and clean, with him signing away any claim to my assets in exchange for me forgiving the debt. He married Vanessa 6 months after that, I saw the announcement on social media, and last I heard, he was working at a different consulting firm in a less prestigious position. I started my new job at Thornton Enterprises the following Monday, working as an analyst for exactly 3 weeks before being promoted to my actual position as CEO. The press release announcing my emergence caused a sensation. The mysterious founder finally revealed. A woman in her 30s who'd built an empire while hiding in plain sight. The Henderson acquisition went through flawlessly. Richard became one of my most trusted advisors, and Patricia ended up joining our board. Together, we've expanded into 6 new markets and doubled our revenue. As for me, I'm still living in my house, still driving my cars, still running my company. But now I do it as myself, fully and completely. I date occasionally, successful men who know exactly who I am and don't feel threatened by it. I give speeches about women in technology, about the importance of knowing your worth, about the dangers of hiding who you are to make others comfortable. And sometimes, late at night, I sit in my solarium among the orchids and think about those 6 years I spent pretending. I don't regret them entirely. They taught me something valuable, that hiding your light doesn't prevent people from trying to dim it. It just gives them permission to treat you as less than you are. I am Claire Thornton. I'm brilliant, successful, powerful, and wealthy, and I will never, ever pretend to be anything less than that again. Not for anyone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.